This brings us to basic principle number 2. A vision without action is simply a daydream. But action without vision is a nightmare. Step 2 in the process is to develop a resource map. This will establish the constraints and the opportunities. What are the existing land management allocations? Where are the cultural sites? Are threatened and endangered species habitat shown on the map? Are noxious or invasive weed populations present? You need to be aware of wildlife critical habitat, nests, corridors, etc. What is the existing infrastructure that may be available for use? This is a sample of the wildlife constraints for an area outside of Bend, Oregon. At first glance, it may appear that it will be impossible to put a trail system here. But by working with the specialist and asking specific questions about what is allowed and what is not, you can refine the maps and identify possible opportunities. In this particular case, the trail planner was able to put a 50-mile trail system on the ground and meet all the required constraints. Next, you need to inventory what you have to work with. This includes roads, trails, and facilities. Any unusual features such as cabins or ponds, quarries, borrow pits, or possible play areas, rock outcrops or other scenic views, and commercial services that could provide for riders' needs. Then use your creativity to explore what's there and what's not there. If something is in the wrong location or doesn't provide for rider needs, find a better location to build a better trail, to provide the desired opportunities with a sustainable trail. It's obvious here that several people felt it was important to get up to the trees in the background. But is this trail in the right location? If not, don't use it. However, you need to determine why folks are riding up to the trees. Perhaps there's a very desirable campsite or a scenic overlook behind the trees. If so, is there a better way to provide access to this specific spot? Most trail systems utilize existing infrastructure to some degree because it's out there and we can't afford to start from scratch. The challenge is to creatively explore what you have and connect the dots. In order to connect the dots, we have to know what they are and where they are. This cabin might be one of the dots. It's an interesting cabin in a pleasant setting. It might provide a good spot for riders to stop, relax, and maybe have lunch. They might be able to figure out why the roof is long on one side and short on the other. Here is another desirable feature. Do you think at the end of this ride he'll remember this spot? What other routes may be worth considering? Old mining roads, abandoned railroad beds, old skid trails, historical wagon routes. All of these might provide appropriate riding as well as interpretive opportunities. What else might be usable? What attractions can you identify in the area? What's out there that people want to see or do? Are there any overlooks or vistas? Or historical sites? What about fishing streams or lakes? Or wildlife viewing opportunities? Are there any museums or interpretive areas? Or just pretty places? How about services? Where do riders find gasoline, lodging, food, repairs, or accessories? And can they be accessed from the trails? Once we have the inventory, what do we do with it? Let's look at this inventory. In typical fashion, it may look like a bowl of spaghetti, but let's simplify it by taking a look at specific routes. This one is a good perimeter trail, so it's worth keeping. This one may exceed density guidelines, so it will go away. This one is steep, rocky, and has huge erosion issues. It has to go away too. This trail, or route, provides good loop opportunities, so it'll stay in our trail system. This one goes by a goshawk nest. It needs to go away. This one runs through a riparian zone, so we can't use it. This one is a good trail, but needs some relocation. We'll identify it and get back to it later. This trail runs through critical elk habitat. So take it off the list. Now what? Remember that trail that needed relocation? We will complete the necessary relocation. We couldn't use the trail through the elk areas, but we would still like to have more loops in this area. So let's develop a short connector. Now we need to look at the trailhead. All access from the trailhead has to go over one trail, which really concentrates use and limits dispersal. We'll consider adding another connector that can disperse folks farther back into the system. Now, let's look at trail difficulty levels. Can you identify any problems? Here are a couple of the easiest segments where a rider must use a more difficult segment to complete a loop. If we kept this the way it is, families or new riders may be forced to travel on a more difficult section in order to get back to the trailhead. This is not something that we want the riders to encounter. It detracts from their experience. Instead, let's build an easier connector to complete the easiest level loop. The short segment of trail that is left needs to be signed to indicate that it's more difficult. That doesn't mean the trail has to be changed, but the signing has to indicate that when a rider chooses to use that route, they will encounter areas that are more difficult. Here is another place where an easiest loop doesn't connect. A short, easiest connector can solve that. When you are done with this effort, you're well on your way to a trail system. This is a map of the East Fort Rock area in Oregon. As you can see, it is a diverse system with many loops and a full range of difficulties. A rider here can plan a good day of riding, and more importantly, can have fun. Here's another short scenario to consider. We have the Rocky Ridge Trail and the Slippery Draw Trail. We have another small trail system to the south, and another small area to the north. There is an existing subdivision, and a small town in the area. What could you do here to create a system? You might put in some connections to produce loops. You could provide connections to the small system on the south so riders could disperse and find additional opportunities. You could connect the area to the north as well. You might also consider a connection to the subdivision, especially if you're having problems with existing encroachment out of the subdivision. By providing a designated route, you might be able to reduce unauthorized use. What are the possibilities to connect the subdivision to town with a trail? Then you could connect the town to the trail system. Now you've created a trail system that will provide for the user needs and reduce many of the problems associated with an inadequate system.